The September sun blazed mercilessly over Dust Creek, Texas, turning the dirt streets into furnaces. Nathaniel Cross adjusted his weathered hat as he rode toward the crowd gathered at the train station. At 32, the lean cowboy had seen enough of frontier life to recognize trouble, and the excited voices ahead carried the wrong kind of energy. Colonel Jeremiah Blackwood stood on a wooden platform, his blue Confederate uniform gleaming, despite being 15 years out of date. His red face and booming voice commanded attention from the 100-odd men pressed forward, clutching money and checking pocket watches. "Ladies and gentlemen," Blackwood announced, "today we conduct business that will benefit our entire community." Nate dismounted near the Red Rose Saloon, his gray eyes scanning the crowd. Something felt wrong, terribly wrong. The air reeked of sweat, tobacco, and anticipation that made his skin crawl. "Frank," Blackwood called to Deputy Morrison, whose badge reflected the harsh sunlight, "bring out our first item." What emerged from the train car made Nate's blood freeze. A young Native American woman, barely 19, was dragged onto the platform in heavy iron shackles. Her long black hair couldn't hide the defiant fire in her dark eyes. Despite the torn white dress and chains cutting into her wrists, she carried herself with the dignity of royalty. "Behold," Blackwood spread his arms wide, "a genuine Apache princess, captured during last month's raid, young, strong, ready for domestic work." The crowd erupted in cheers. Nate felt sick as respectable businessmen, and even Reverend Stone nodded approvingly from the front row. "Bidding starts at $50. 60, shouted a voice. 75. Tommy Walker, the 14-year-old stable boy, appeared at Nate's elbow. His brown eyes were wide with horror. "Mr. Cross, this ain't right. Maria's been crying all morning, says this is the devil's work." Nate's hand instinctively moved to his Colt .45. One man against 100. Drawing iron would only get him killed without helping the girl. $100. Reverend Stone's voice cut through the noise, his black suit pristine. "The Lord's work requires dedicated servants." 120, countered a rancher. On the platform, the girl stood perfectly still, chin raised in defiance. But Nate could see the slight tremor in her hands, the way her breathing quickened with each shouted bid. 150, called Dr. Wright, swaying drunk. The bidding reached 170. Colonel Blackwood raised his hands for silence, his cold blue eyes sweeping the crowd and landing on Nate. "Before we conclude," Blackwood announced, his voice carrying warning, "remember this is legal business under territorial law. Any interference will be met with force." His stare lingered on Nate, calculating and predatory. "Do I hear 200? Silence. $200 was a fortune, enough to buy a farm. "Going once," Blackwood's voice echoed off wooden buildings. Nate's mind raced. Every instinct screamed at him to act, but what could one man do? His mother had been a Quaker, raised him to believe every soul was precious. She'd died when he was 12, killed by raiders. He'd sworn never to stand by while innocents suffered. Going twice. "A sold to Reverend Stone for $170! Applause erupted. Blackwood grinned triumphantly, but his eyes never left Nate's face. "Mr. Cross," he called over the noise, "you seem mighty quiet for a man witnessing good American commerce." The crowd turned to stare. Hostile, suspicious eyes bore into him. Nate had a choice: tip his hat and ride away, or make a stand that could get him killed. He swung down from his horse. The crowd parted as he walked toward the platform, spurs jingling with each step. Tommy followed at a distance, face tight with worry. "Colonel," Nate said, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence, "I believe you're forgetting something." Blackwood's eyes narrowed. "And what might that be, Cowboy?" "This is 1887. Slavery ended 22 years ago. What you're doing isn't commerce. It's a crime." The silence was deafening. Men who'd been laughing now stared with expressions ranging from shock to murderous rage. That girl, Nate continued, nodding toward the platform, is a human being, not property to be bought and sold. You're talking about legal territorial business, Blackwood sputtered. I'm talking about right and wrong, and this is wrong. Deputy Morrison's hand moved to his gun, fingers trembling. Dr. Wright stepped back, his whiskey-addled brain struggling to process what was happening. You're out of line, Cross, Blackwood said, voice deadly quiet, and you're outnumbered 200 to 1. Maybe, but I'm not wrong. For a moment the two men stared at each other. The crowd held its breath, horses shifting restlessly. Then Blackwood laughed, cold and cruel. If you feel so strongly, why don't you bid? Put your money where your mouth is. Nate's jaw tightened. He had maybe $30, nowhere near enough. I don't have that kind of money. Then you don't have a say in how this town conducts business. Frank, remove this troublemaker. Morrison stepped forward reluctantly. Come on, Nate, just walk away. Ain't nothing you can do. Nate looked at the deputy, then at the hostile crowd. Finally, his gaze moved to the girl. She was watching him with those intelligent dark eyes, and he thought he saw recognition. She knew what he was trying to do. You're right, Frank. There's nothing I can do here. He turned and walked back to his horse, the crowd's jeers following him. He mounted and rode slowly out of town, feeling 200 pairs of eyes burning into his back. Behind him, the auction continued. Other Native Americans were brought forward. Teenagers, elderly, all chained and helpless. The crowd's enthusiasm returned, as if Nate had never existed. As he made camp 5 miles outside town, Nate didn't know that his small act of defiance had been witnessed by more than townspeople. In the hills surrounding Dust Creek, ancient eyes had watched, eyes that had seen his refusal to participate in evil, even when silence would have been safer. The sun set behind him as Nate built a small fire, thinking about the girl's eyes and the cowardice of good men who chose to do nothing. That night, runners carried word of his actions to places where justice still meant something, where old ways were remembered and honored. Nate Cross went to sleep, believing he had failed. He would wake to discover that sometimes the greatest victories begin with the smallest acts of courage. Dawn broke grey and cold over Dust Creek. Nate had been awake since before first light, restless dreams filled with chains and burning eyes. Something had drawn him back to the hills overlooking town, a feeling he couldn't name. That's when he saw them. At first, just shadows in the morning mist. But as the sun climbed higher, the shadows became shapes, horses, riders, dozens, then hundreds, emerging from the haze like spirits made flesh. They moved in perfect silence across the hilltops. Each rider sat tall and proud, faces painted with sacred symbols, feathers fluttering in their hair. Ancient weapons gleamed in the growing light. At their head rode a man who seemed carved from the mountains themselves, tall, broad-shouldered, with the bearing of a king. His war paint was more elaborate than the others, eagle feathers marking him as chief. The riders spread with military precision, taking positions on every hill surrounding Dust Creek. They moved like water, flowing into formation without a single command. Within minutes, the town was completely encircled. 200 riders, 200 silent guardians of ancient justice. Nate's horse danced nervously, sensing the tension. The cowboy's hand moved instinctively to his gun, then stopped. These weren't raiders. This was something else entirely, something that made his skin prickle with recognition of powers beyond understanding. In town, Tommy Walker was first to notice. The boy had been tending horses when he saw silhouettes against the brightening sky. He stood frozen, a bucket of oats forgotten. "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph," he whispered. Tommy dropped the bucket and ran, feet pounding the boardwalk. "They're here!" he shouted, voice cracking. "They're here!" His cries woke early risers who stumbled from homes and businesses. Maria Santos emerged from her kitchen, flour coating her hands. When she saw the riders, she crossed herself. "Madre de Dios! They have come for justice." Word spread like wildfire. Men who'd been celebrating the night before now stood pale-faced in the streets, counting riders on the hills with rising panic. How many are there? 200, maybe more. What do they want? The riders made no move to descend. They simply sat their horses in perfect silence, watching with the patience of mountains. Colonel Blackwood emerged from the hotel, uniform hastily thrown on, face flushed with anger rather than fear. "Where's Morrison? Get me the sheriff." Deputy Morrison appeared from the saloon, badge crooked, clothes reeking of whiskey. "Colonel, they got us surrounded. What do we do?" Blackwood's eyes swept the hills, recognizing military formation. These weren't wild savages, they were warriors with the high ground. "Get the men together. Anyone who can hold a gun. We'll show these heathens what happens when they threaten Americans." But as the call went out, something strange happened. Men who'd been bold bidding on chained prisoners suddenly found reasons to be elsewhere. Shops closed, doors locked, curtains drew tight. Only those who'd participated in the auction answered. Reverend Stone, Dr. Wright, and a handful whose greed had outweighed conscience. "Cowards!" Blackwood spat, watching empty streets. "Yellow-bellied cowards!" As the sun climbed higher, the chief began descending toward town. He came alone, war paint gleaming, massive frame dwarfing his war horse. Eagle feathers danced in the breeze, sacred symbols seeming to glow with inner light. The townspeople watched in terrified silence as he rode down Main Street, his horse's hooves the only sound. He stopped before the auction platform and sat there, dark eyes taking in every detail. Then he spoke, voice carrying clearly despite being barely above a whisper. "I am Standing Bear, war chief of the Comanche Apache Brotherhood. I come seeking Ayana Whispering Wind, daughter of my blood, child of my heart." The silence was deafening. Blackwood stepped forward, hand on his ornate pistol, but the chief's gaze stopped him cold. "You mistake our intentions, savage," Blackwood said with false bravado. "This is American territory, governed by American law. You have no authority here." Standing Bear's expression didn't change. "I speak not of men's laws, but of laws governing all living things, the law that says a father protects his children. That evil will be answered with justice. Your daughter was legally acquired." Reverend Stone stepped forward, black suit pristine. "Payment for damages from your people's raids. The territorial government has no claim on children of the wind." Standing Bear interrupted, voice still quiet but carrying thunder's weight. "But we did not come only for her." He raised his hand. As if by magic, riders on the hills began moving, not toward town, but into formation. A great circle encompassing the entire settlement, each rider knowing exactly where to position himself. "We came because yesterday evil was done here. Men gathered to buy and sell human souls like cattle. They celebrated suffering, laughed while children wept in chains." The chief's eyes swept the crowd. Everyone who'd participated felt that gaze's weight. Dr. Wright stumbled backward, hands clutching his medical bag. Even Stone's facade began cracking. But we also saw something else. One man who stood alone against 200. One man who spoke truth when lies were profitable. One who chose conscience over comfort. Up on the ridge, Nate felt a chill. The chief was talking about him. But how could he know? How could he have seen? "This man," Standing Bear continued, voice carrying to every corner, "proved not all white men have forgotten right from wrong. Because of him, the Brotherhood offers choice rather than judgment." The chief reached into his war shirt and withdrew a small turquoise eagle. He held it up, catching sunlight like a star. "This is the Brotherhood symbol. For 200 years, we have protected innocence and punished the guilty. We have watched civilization bring both good and evil to this land." He placed the turquoise eagle on the platform where Ayana had stood chained. "Today, we offer justice tempered with mercy. Those who participated in yesterday's evil have until sunset to make amends. Return what was stolen, free those enslaved, make right what was made wrong. Blackwood's face went from red to purple. And if we refuse? Standing Bear's smile was winter cold. Then you will learn some laws are older than governments, some justice deeper than courts, some judgments are final. He turned his horse toward the hills but stopped at town's edge. Without turning, he called out one final message. The man who stood for justice yesterday, he is under our protection now. Any who would harm him will answer to the Brotherhood. As the chief disappeared into the hills, Dust Creek contemplated their choice. On surrounding ridges, 200 silent riders waited with stone's patience, guardians of ancient justice that had finally come to call. The sun climbed toward noon, and sunset suddenly seemed very far away. Hours crawled by like wounded animals. Dust Creek felt besieged, the riders' presence as oppressive as Texas heat. Nate finally descended from his ridge, drawn by responsibility and curiosity. He entered Sarah McAllister's nearly empty saloon. The red-haired proprietor poured whiskey without being asked, her green eyes troubled. "Half the town wants your head," Sarah said quietly. "They think if they hand you over, maybe those riders will leave. And the other half? Too scared to think straight." Her eyes flicked toward the window. "You know what this means? What they're really asking?" Nate nodded grimly. Standing Bear hadn't just demanded Ayanna's return, he'd demanded justice for all wrongs committed in yesterday's auction. Tommy Walker slipped inside, face pale with worry. "Mr. Cross, you need to know something. Colonel Blackwood's planning to take you prisoner, trade you for safe passage." Before Nate could respond, hoofbeats echoed outside. Standing Bear himself appeared in the doorway, his presence filling the room. "You are Cross," the chief said. "I am." Standing Bear studied him, the weathered face, honest eyes, the way he stood without fear. "My daughter spoke of you, said you were the only one who saw her as human." "Your daughter?" "Ayanna Whispering Wind, the girl you tried to save." Nate's jaw tightened. "I didn't save anyone. I just couldn't be part of what was happening. You stood alone against 200 men. You spoke truth when lies were profitable." The chief's voice carried deep respect. "Such courage is rare. Where is she now?" Standing Bear's expression darkened. "Gone. Sold to men who see her as property. But she will be found." The chief moved closer. "I came to offer choice. The town burns with hatred. Soon they will try to sacrifice you to appease what they see as savage gods. You could come with us." Before Nate could answer, the saloon doors burst open. Colonel Blackwood strode in with Deputy Morrison and 3 armed men. "There you are, Cross," Blackwood snarled. "You're coming with us. You think to bargain with stolen goods." Standing Bear's laugh was like thunder. "This man's courage has bought him our protection." Blackwood's men spread out, trying to surround Nate, but Standing Bear simply raised his hand and made a gesture, simple as a blessing, but the effect was immediate. Sound came first, low, rhythmic drumming from the earth itself. Then windows darkened as shapes moved past. Riders, dozens flowing down from hills like shadow rivers. In moments, the street filled with mounted warriors. They made no threatening moves, simply sat their horses in perfect silence, watching with predators' patience. Blackwood's face went white, seeing his group outnumbered 50 to 1. "This isn't over," he said, retreating with his men. "No," Standing Bear agreed. "It is not." Maria Santos burst through the doors, flour-dusted and frantic. "Senor Cross, you must come. The church basement. There are prisoners, dying ones." At the church, Tommy produced a key. "I clean here sometimes for extra money." Inside was dark and stuffy, with weak coughing sounds from below. A trapdoor near the altar led to a basement Nate had never known existed. What they found would haunt him forever. 7 people lay chained on the dirt floor, Native Americans ranging from an elderly man to a 12-year-old girl. All were clearly ill, breathing labored, skin pale and clammy. "Dios mío," Maria whispered, covering her mouth. These chains were old and rusty, cutting into skin where they'd struggled. Stagnant water sat in one corner, mouldy bread scraps scattered about. "These aren't from yesterday," Sarah said, voice tight with horror. "These have been here for weeks, maybe months." The elderly man lifted his head with great effort. "Water," he croaked. "Please." The children. They worked frantically to free the prisoners. As they did, pieces of a larger horror fell into place. This wasn't just about yesterday's auction, it was systematic operation going on for months, maybe years. Footsteps on the stairs made them freeze. Reverend Stone appeared in the doorway, his black suit immaculate despite circumstances. His pale face showed no surprise. "I wondered when someone would discover this," he said with false piety. "God's will works in mysterious ways." "The God's will?" Nate's hand moved to his gun. "You think God wants children chained in basements? These are heathens who reject the Lord's salvation. By placing them in service to Christian families, we give them redemption through honest labor." "You mean slavery?" "I mean Christian charity. Every penny from their sale supports the Lord's work." Standing Bear appeared like a force of nature, his massive frame filling the doorway. Two other warriors followed, faces set in barely controlled rage. "So we find the truth at last," Standing Bear said quietly. Stone's face went white. "This is a house of God. You have no authority." Standing Bear's backhanded blow sent the Reverend sprawling against stone walls. The movement was lightning fast. "Your God must be cruel," Standing Bear said, looking at chained prisoners, "to demand such worship." He knelt beside the elderly man, speaking rapid Apache. The response brought such fury to Standing Bear's face that even Nate stepped back. "4 months," Standing Bear translated, voice deadly calm. "Many others passed through here. Some died, bodies thrown to pigs. Working together, they freed the 7 prisoners and carried them into the church proper. Maria began tending injuries, while Tommy fetched water and food." Standing Bear forced Stone to write a confession. Every name, date, price, destination for dozens sold through the church's operation. The network reached from Texas to New Orleans, San Antonio to Mexico City. As sunset approached, Colonel Blackwood and his men fled in panic, horses loaded with hastily packed belongings. But Brotherhood riders had been waiting. Like wolves, warriors swept down from positions, surrounding the escapees in moments. Standing Bear watched with satisfaction, then turned to Nate. "The hunt for those who bought prisoners will take months. We could use a man who understands both worlds." Nate looked around. At Maria tending dying children, Tommy who'd risked everything, Sarah who'd chosen sides when it mattered. These people, the good ones, too scared to act. They'll need someone to help rebuild. Make sure this never happens again. And will you be that someone? I'll be whatever they need. But I won't run. This is my home too, and it's worth fighting for. Standing Bear nodded slowly. "Then you understand the Brotherhood's first lesson. True justice begins where you stand." The war chief moved toward the door, then paused. "When we find Ayana, she will know her courage wasn't wasted. That one man's stand changed everything. Give her a message. Tell her some chains can't break the spirit. Tell her that her people are coming." "I will. And I will tell her not all white men have forgotten what honor means." Night fell as they worked to save the 7 prisoners. Maria administered what medical care she could while Tommy fetched supplies. Sarah stood guard over the cowering Reverend, her shotgun ready. Stone's confession revealed the full scope of corruption, a network spanning 2 states with buyers from New Orleans to Mexico City. Working with territorial authorities, they began tracking every name, every transaction. The hunt took months, but the Brotherhood's reach was long. One by one, those who had profited from human suffering faced justice. Some fled to distant cities, others tried to hide behind legal technicalities. None escaped. Ayana was found 3 months later in a New Orleans mansion, freed by Brotherhood warriors who had tracked her across half the continent. Her rescue became legend. 12 warriors infiltrating the city like ghosts, liberating not just her, but 17 other captives held in similar circumstances. When she returned to Texas, Ayana found a transformed town. The church basement had been converted into a school where all children, regardless of origin, could learn together. The auction platform was torn down, replaced with a monument bearing simple words, "Justice begins where you stand." Nate Cross accepted the position of sheriff, ensuring that justice in Dust Creek would mean more than law. He married Sarah McAllister 2 years later, their wedding attended by representatives from 12 tribes who had heard the story of the cowboy who refused to bid on a chained girl. Standing Bear visited every year on the anniversary, bringing news of the Brotherhood's continuing work. The network they dismantled had been vast, reaching into territories and states where slavery was supposedly abolished. But it was being hunted to extinction by warriors who never forgot, never forgave, and never stopped seeking justice. Tommy Walker grew up to become a U.S. Marshal, inspired by Nate's example. Maria Santos expanded her kitchen into a restaurant that served everyone equally, regardless of color or origin. Even Dr. Wright found redemption, sobering up to become the town's only physician again, treating Indian and white patients without distinction. Reverend Stone's church was rebuilt under new leadership, a young minister who preached that all souls were equal in God's eyes. The basement was sealed forever, but its memory lived on as a reminder of what happened when good people chose to look away from evil. Years passed, and the story spread across the frontier. Travelers would hear it around campfires, in saloons, wherever tales of the Old West were told. Each telling carried the same message. In a world where evil seems to prosper and good men choose silence, sometimes all it takes is one person willing to stand up and say, "This is wrong." The Brotherhood continued its work, moving like shadows across the frontier, protecting the innocent and punishing those who preyed on the defenseless. Their numbers grew as word spread. Not just Native Americans now, but men and women of all colors, who understood that justice transcended the boundaries of race or law. Nate lived the rest of his life in Dust Creek, but on quiet evenings when the wind carried whispers from the hills, old-timers swore they could still see riders on the horizon, guardians watching over those who chose courage over comfort, justice over profit, conscience over convenience. The turquoise eagle that Standing Bear had left on the auction platform was mounted in the new church, a symbol of the transformation one man's moral courage had wrought. Children learned its meaning in school, that sometimes the greatest victories begin with the smallest acts of conscience. As Nate grew older, he would often ride out to the same hill where he'd first seen the 200 riders emerge from the mist. There, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, he would remember that September day when everything changed. He'd been one man standing against 200, but he hadn't been alone. Not really. Somewhere in the hills, ancient eyes had been watching, ancient hearts had been judging, and ancient warriors had been preparing to ensure that evil would not triumph while good men stood silent. The Brotherhood's work was never finished, but neither was the hope that rose with each new dawn. Hope that courage would overcome fear, that justice would defeat corruption, and that the bonds of common humanity would prove stronger than the chains of hatred and greed. On his final day, Nate Cross died peacefully in his bed, surrounded by the family he'd built and the community he'd helped transform. As word of his passing spread, something remarkable happened. From across the territory, people came to pay their respects. Cowboys and farmers, shopkeepers and teachers, Native Americans and Mexican immigrants. They came because they'd heard the story. They came because they understood that one man's refusal to compromise his conscience had changed not just a town, but the very idea of what justice could mean in a land where it was too often bought and sold. And in the hills around Dust Creek, if you knew how to look and listen, you could see them, shadows on horseback, watching over the funeral of a man who had proven that heroism wasn't about being the strongest or fastest or most skilled with a gun. Sometimes it was simply about knowing the difference between right and wrong, and having the courage to act on that knowledge, no matter the cost. The 200 riders of the Brotherhood faded back into legend, but their legacy lived on in every person who chose to stand up for the defenseless, speak out against injustice, and remember that the true measure of a man wasn't what he could take, but what he was willing to give. And in the end, that was enough.